Hi everyone. I can hardly believe that we are already at week 7 of our early learning series. Thank you all so much for joining me up until this stage. Now, we've worked really hard over the last few weeks to understand some of the basic principles of how it is that children learn. So much so that I feel that we've finally gotten to the stage this week that we can start to have a look at how it is that children understand maths and numeracy concepts. We often think that the first step in teaching children maths is to teach them what the numbers look like. But there's so much that needs to happen before we get to this stage. Because these numbers are completely abstract symbols. They represent quantities. And as the symbols, they have no inherent meaning to your child. As adults, we use numbers on such a daily basis that we tend to forget as children we also needed to first learn what these numbers represent. Now, let's look at the different phases that children go through in order to be able to understand mathematics concepts. During the first phase, we want to start introducing a maths vocabulary because we want to help them to understand what the different functions require. We often forget that words like divide, times, plus, and minus all have a specific action coupled to it. So start using these words if you're in your everyday comings and goings to help your child understand what they mean. Here are some examples in which you can add maths vocabulary to your everyday. For instance, you can say things like, if we divide this orange in half, we will each get an equal portion. You can also say things like, bring me your jacket plus your shoes plus your socks. Or, I want to order the Hawaiian pizza, but minus the pineapple. Or, in total, there are 5 of us living in this house. And also remember to use comparison words like first and last and in the middle, halfway, shorter, taller, smallest, biggest, longest, shortest. Those are all very important words as well. Once your children understand that maths vocabulary, we want to start teaching them the sequence in which the numbers appear. We call this rote counting. And rote counting simply means the rhyme of knowing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in that sequence. And then from 10 to 20 and 30 and 40. So being able to count saying the numbers. We call it rote counting because your child is simply saying the words without really understanding what they mean. So at the age of 2, children are usually able to rote count from 1 to 5. At the age of 3, they can count from 1 to 10. At the age of 4, they can count from 1 to 20. And generally, by the age of 5, they are able to count from 1 to 30 or 50, or in some cases, even to 100. Now, it is important to note that according to South African requirements, your child is considered school ready if they are able to count only from 1 to 20 at the age of 6 years old. Now, once your child can count forwards from 1 to at least 10, you want to start teaching them to count backwards. Because remember that numbers go in both directions. Teaching your child to count backwards is going to enable them to understand the number line, the value of 0, and as they get older, it's going to help them to understand negative numbers in higher grades. Now, it's interesting, but I found that there's this pattern in which children tend to get stuck when they learn to count from 1 to 20. I don't know if you've noticed it as well, but very often they can count from 1 to 13, and then they'll either skip 14 or 15. And the same thing happens again at 16 and 17. They'll skip one of those and then count fine again from 18 onwards. I have no idea why this happens, but my hypothesis is that it's because the words 14 and 15 start with the same letter, as does 16 and 17. Now you might, if you find that that's happening with your child as well, that they're skipping either any of those numbers, you might want to really emphasize it during your counting practice. So you might want to go 13, 14, 15, and then again 16, 17 to help your child remember that. Now, interestingly, they always tend to get stuck, it seems, at the switch over numbers as well. So they'll be able to count from 1 to 29 and then get a bit stuck. So you might have to prompt them by saying 29, 30. And then they can go all the way to 39, and then you might have to say 39, 40, just to help them switch over every time they get to a tens. So the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on. All right, once your child has the maths vocabulary and they can rote count, we want to start marrying all of those things together. We want to start marrying the quantities with the number sequence, and then also the symbols as well. We want to start putting them all together. And so we generally do this by introducing the symbols. Now, you can start introducing the symbols 1 to 3 with young children first, and then make sure they've really got those consolidated before you add 4 and 5. And once they know what the symbols 1 to 5 look like, you can add 6 to 10. Now I realize this must be quite confusing because of the camera on my phone. These probably look like they're going backwards. Sorry about that. Now, what is important is that if you are going to be making or putting up a number chart, I just made this one very quickly last night. It was very fast. Whenever you show your child a numeral, it is important that you have the representative quantity on the same picture as well. So if they don't know, if they can't remember what the symbol means, they can count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that must be a 5. Okay. And then interestingly enough, there are quite a few people who argue for introducing the Roman numerals before you introduce this number system, which is the Chinese Arabic system that we use in our everyday comings and goings. And at first I thought it very confusing to introduce the Roman numerals. But actually, if you look at it, it does make sense. So let me show you. If you look at these Roman numerals, you can see that the representative quantity is in the symbol. So numerals 1, 2, 3, and then only when you get to number 4 do the symbols become slightly more abstract, but less so than in our number system. Generally, my experience has been that children can cope absolutely fine with learning to associate these numbers with the representative quantities. But if you find that your child is struggling, you might want to first introduce the Roman numerals until they really understand those, and then switch over from there to this system that we use. Now, also very important is I want you to just be careful that when you introduce the numerals 1 to 10 to your child, that it's more or less in the same font in which your child will use at school. Now, you might remember that I have mentioned in one of my previous videos that the ideal font you want to use is a grade 1 BBA font. But I just want to quickly show you what the numerals should look like and shouldn't look like. So you want to use a 1 that looks like this and not with this extra tail part. A 2 should look like that without any extra twirls or curls. This is the correct number 3, not this one. A 4 should look like this. A 7 should look like this. I know in the French system, this is what a 7 should look like. And an 8 that is 2 circles instead of the infinity that we will often use. And once your child can recognize the numbers in the order 1 to 10, you want to start mixing it up and giving it to them in a random order. Because this is the true test of whether they really recognize the numbers, is when they can do it in an unusual order to the way that it's usually represented. Right. Once they really understand all of these concepts that we've just discussed, they can start to manipulate those numbers. So they can start to do addition and subtraction, multiplication and division. And next week, we are going to look at how to do these 4 functions and how to introduce them to young children. But before we get there, I wanted to look at some ways in which you can practice the phases that we have just discussed. I did say in all of my videos up until this point that whenever I show you activities, I'm going to really try and stick to activities that are fast and that use household items. Because I know that parents are busy. You don't have time to really set up extra activities. And let's be honest, in this current pandemic, funds are pretty tight for most of us. And I really intend to stick to that. So I'll show you some of the fun things that I've made this week that you can use in teaching your child these concepts. All right, so let's start, for instance, with the vocabulary. When you are teaching your child maths vocabulary, one of the easiest ways in which to introduce that is through any kind of activity that requires measuring. So baking is a really great way to introduce maths vocabulary. Or for instance, you can measure distances with a shoelace. So for instance, you can measure how long this wall is using the shoelace, or even your hands. So, you might come to realizing things like this piece of wall, mommy's hands fit into it 5 times, but my baby sister's hand fit into it 10 times. So now you are starting to introduce comparison to your child and also different units of measurement. Then you can measure their height, make a height chart, measure their weight, and have them be part of that. I saw a fantastic idea where a mom had researched the average height of different animals, and she had included this on her child's height chart. So the child could compare how tall she was to, for instance, a kangaroo or a flamingo or a giraffe, which I thought was a really fun idea. And then teach them about weight and weighing things. Scales are great. And I'll show you this amazing activity. I hope that it shows up. Let me just grab it. So I found an awesome idea where you could just use a normal clothes hanger and some string. I've actually used some ribbon. And let me show you here. So I've tied to it just different objects. And so by using this system, you can just hook your scale onto a doorknob or even onto your fingers, and immediately you can tell which objects weigh more or weigh the same. So I thought that was just a really fun idea. Right, then when we get to the counting phase, children will often count anything. So you can give them things like bottle tops or rocks, for instance, to use as counters. And remember that you want to be counting physical objects because they first have to work in the 3-dimensional space before we can start showing them concepts in a 2-dimensional space, like on a piece of paper. Games like snakes and ladders are fantastic, or a homemade abacus. So this homemade abacus, let me show you. Oops, it's stuck. So I made this homemade abacus literally just using one of my leftover Tupperware lids. I don't know where the rest of it is gone. That tends to happen quite often in my house. But all I've done is I've just put some strings onto beads and tied it around the back, and there you've got your own homemade abacus. And these beads are from broken jewelry. So I collect my own as well as my friends' jewelry, and then I just cut up the beads and then use them for different activities. So there's a homemade abacus. Hopscotch is also really fun and interactive kinetic way to teach children about counting. And you don't have to wait until the next time that you go to the park to play hopscotch. You can draw your own using chalk on the sidewalk or the drive-in or pavement, wherever is easiest for you to access. And then when we get to the recognition phase, so both to recognize numbers and quantity, cards are fantastic. You can get your child to actually count all the little units on the cards. And round about the age of 5, children are usually able to cope with the rules and stick to the rules of a game like Go Fish. So you can play that card game. That's going to be really good for their math skills as well. I showed you last week how to make your own puzzles using magazine cutouts, right? So if you take that same concept, for instance, and you'll see this is a picture of a lion. And what I've done is that on the back of each page that I've cut, or each piece, I've actually stuck a number. So number 6, and then I've just got some press stick on so it won't fall off, but obviously your child can stick that with glue. You put the representative number both on the piece and on the page where it needs to stick, and so your child can match the two numbers that are the same to teach them number recognition. Dot to dot is also a great way to teach your child number recognition. So you'll remember that I showed you the dot to dot pages last week and how that was important for visual closure. But if you look at these pictures, they have numbers written next to them as well. So that's an awesome activity. Paint by number, for instance, is great. Dominoes is great. And you can make your own dominoes. So I've just made these, there's the match, using normal popsicle sticks. Or you can make your own numerals by using craft sticks or even just normal sticks that you find outside or in the park. Or you could make a treasure hunt, for instance. So when you give your child a treasure map, and also in the areas where they need to look for clues, number those to help them get used to what the numerals look like. Okay, that is a lot of ideas and a lot of work for you guys to go and do this week. And then next week, we're going to go ahead and have a look at the actual functions of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Thanks, everybody. And before I go, just a very quick reminder that I intend for these videos to remain free. So please feel free to share them and check us out on Instagram and Facebook and share those platforms with your friends as well. And also remember to keep a lookout every Monday for when these videos publish. See you next week.